I'm very excited about today's episode because what I want to share with you today is actually a process that I have been practicing myself for quite a while now. I'd say at least a year. I would say in the year that I've been working with this practice, it has evolved for me. It has become deeper. It has become more powerful. It has gotten into places within myself that I didn't even really know were there. The amount of freedom that I've been able to experience with this practice has become increasingly powerful, right? The longer I work with this, the more it opens up for me. To simply put it this way, what I've come to call this practice, and it's something, I think many teachers talk about things like this, so I wouldn't claim to have invented this, but it's something that I definitely took suggestions from different teachers, different books I've read, different therapists and coaches I've worked with, integrated all of that and made it my own. And what I would call this is that it's a practice of deep feeling, or another way to say it could be a practice of letting go. Why we need this practice, right? Because if you don't know why you need it, then doing it doesn't really mean anything to you, right? So why do we need this practice? And what I really want to talk about is the process of accumulation. There's a coach I worked with earlier this year. Many of you have probably heard of him. His name is Peter Crone. But I had the opportunity to work with him earlier this year, and I went through a health mastermind with him. He was breaking down the study of Ayurveda, which Ayurveda is an ancient practice, an ancient study, really a science of health and wellness, and different body types and how different body types relate with different foods and things like that. But what I found really profound about the process of Ayurveda is when it talks about disease in the body, or it talks about illness, it says that illness is the result of accumulation, and how all disease or all illness is the result of accumulation in the body. Now, normally when we hear disease, we think of things like autoimmune disorders or cancer, or add to the list, right? All different types of illnesses. And that's definitely true. Definitely is relevant. But I think even more than that, what I'm speaking about and how it shows up in my work is dealing with things like anxiety, dealing with things like depression, dealing with things like fear, dealing with things like dating or in relationships, the kinds of things that manifest or show up as discomfort, as frustration, as anger, as scarcity, all these different types of things that show up in our love lives, in our intimate relationships, are really the result of accumulation. So what do I mean when I talk about accumulation? I mean things we pick up along the way. We accumulate things in childhood, right? And I've talked many times about growing up with your parents, and whatever kind of environment you grew up in with your parents, you accumulated a lot in that environment, right? You accumulated ideas about yourself, you accumulated certain emotions, certain feelings, certain habits and patterns and ways of dealing with things. When you got into elementary school and middle school and high school, and you got to know different peers, and you made friends and you lost friends, and you experienced acceptance and rejection, humiliation and love, and all these different kinds of things, you're accumulating the entire time, right? The entire time that you're going through all your life experiences, you're accumulating things. Not only did I accumulate things in my past, but I am actively accumulating things in the present. And so every single day, from the things I watch on TV and hear in music, from the things I see when I go to the gym or when I go out in public, or the things people say or the things people do, or the interactions that I have with my wife, or the interactions I have with friends or colleagues or clients, or things that are going on in my business. You are accumulating aspects of that. And what ends up happening is the things that we accumulate, we end up holding them in our bodies, and we end up carrying them with us. Really, when we talk about accumulation, we are talking about more of the negative stuff. We are talking about more of the fear, the sadness, the anxiety, the stress, the pressure, the fear of the future, right? Like all of these things are more of what we accumulate, what we hold on to, because the positive stuff, and there's a breath worker, her name's Lori Reyes. She actually, in the Inspired Love program, she's the one who comes in and facilitates the breath work. She's amazing. I've been working with her for about 10 years, and she's been doing it for like 30 years. I got this from her, and it makes perfect sense to me. As she said, when we experience those positive impressions, they don't really accumulate because they just kind of move right through us, right? There's nothing in us that resists those positive impressions. So it's like, whew, I'm happy, and it just moves right through me. Like I'm not holding on to that. It's not causing any kind of response in my body where I want to like hold on to it. The more negative impressions that we experience, those are the impressions that we really hold on to. That's where the accumulation happens, because when I experience fear in my body, or I experience a rejection or a sadness or a loss or grief or anything like that, there's a tendency to like resist a little bit, right? There's a tightening that happens. The muscles tighten. I might feel like a shortness of breath in my chest. I might feel like feeling sick to my stomach, or it can take different forms. And this is where accumulation happens. And so as we're going through life, and this has been happening your entire life, since you were a very little child, and maybe you grew up in a household where, maybe your parents were a little bit crazy or a little bit stressed out or a little bit, under pressure, and that pressure spilled over onto you. Or maybe you had older siblings, or maybe you were bullied at school, or maybe you were rejected by a friend or a classmate or a boyfriend or girlfriend. But wherever you experienced those negative, those fearful impressions, I want you to really even start to pay attention to what do you feel in your body, because you can feel that tightening happening. You can feel like that holding on. Imagine if you're on a roller coaster and you're riding your way up to the top and you're about to go over that loop and come down, right? Like if you think about being on that roller coaster and the feeling that you have going up to the top, and it's like bracing yourself, right? Like something big is coming, and you're about to experience a really intense feeling, and there's a little bit of fear and anxiety and excitement, and it's all mixed up together, and you're like bracing yourself for the experience. If you've ever been on a roller coaster, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. The feeling I'm talking about is not so different from that. I'll just use an example from my experience. My dad was an alcoholic, and I've shared about my dad many times, very toxic relationship that I had with him. And I remember being like 13, 14 years old, and my dad would sometimes work till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I remember on those nights when he was working late, and we know that he had been drinking all day at work. When I say we, I'm talking about myself and my stepmother. And we would be sitting in the living room, like I'll never forget these nights. Like we were sitting in the living room, literally just bracing ourselves, knowing he was gonna come pulling in the driveway any minute, and we didn't know who was gonna walk through the door. We didn't know if he was gonna be happy-go-lucky, hey, how you doing, Dad? Or if he was gonna be in a bad mood, start throwing shit, start calling people names, start lashing out, right? Like we didn't know who was going to be walking in the door. And so we're sitting there in the living room. You could feel the tension, like you could cut the tension with a knife, right? I just remember like myself and my stepmom just sitting there in complete silence, knowing that my father was going to come through the door any minute and not knowing who was going to be coming in or what was going to happen. There's a tension that builds up in your body when you have experiences like that. When you have had to live with this tension, the way I did with my father, if you were in any kind of situation where you felt that tension, what happens is you start to hold that in your body, and it becomes an accumulation, right? Because you're not releasing it. The feeling is not moving through you, but rather it's something that you tighten, you resist, and then you hold that and you carry that with you. Again, like that can happen with so many different experiences in life, so I don't need to go on and on about it. Wherever you felt that tension in your body and you've been holding on to it, and then you maybe learned when you were young based on living in a certain household or having certain experiences at school, but you learn to tighten and resist those experiences. And then what happens is as you go through life and as you get older, you continue to tighten and resist and accumulate, right? And so it starts to become a chronic thing where it's not just something that happened to me when I was a little kid. It happened to me when I was a little kid, but then I've continued to relate with life in that way as I continue on and on throughout my life. And so it starts to happen more and more and more. And I start to accumulate more and more and more and more. And resistance starts to become not something I do when I'm afraid, but something I do as a matter of course. It's habitual in my life. And so it's like you might be getting ready for a date and you might be in resistance, even just getting ready for a date, even just getting yourself dressed, doing your makeup, doing your hair, looking in the mirror, right? And you're in resistance this whole time. And if you really start to check in and you really start to look and observe what's happening in your body in those moments when you feel that fear, you'll start to see that there is a tightening that's happening. There is a resistance that's happening. There is a holding on that's happening. Like this experience is not moving through you, but it's actually getting stuck inside of you. And you might be resisting that experience, right? You're having some anxiety build up, some fear, right? And you have thoughts. You're like, I don't know where this is going to go. Am I wasting my time? Is this even worth it? Is this person going to look the way they did in their pictures? Are they going to treat me well? Are they going to be a jerk? Like, am I going to go home feeling completely demoralized tonight, right? Like all these thoughts are going through your mind. As these thoughts are going through your mind, the tension is building in your body. It's really important that you start to see how this happens. The thoughts go through your mind, and as the thoughts go through your mind, the tension builds in your body. And as the tension builds in your body, you are holding on. You get to that date and you think like, oh my God, it was such an awful date. Well, what I want to say, if you showed up to that date in that way, having accumulated all that stuff before the date even began, it was gonna be a horrible date. Before you even got started, before you even met the person, before you even said hello, the course of the rest of the evening had already been determined by the fact that you showed up in a state of resistance, in a state of fear, in a state of tension, not being comfortable, not being relaxed, not being at ease, not feeling good or relaxed inside your body, right? I hope I'm communicating this clearly. The point I want to get across right now is that this process of accumulation started at a time in your life when you had no choice. You were very small, the world was very big, life was scary, and you started to be afraid. And you started to hold on to stuff in your body. And the more you hold this energy in your body, the more it becomes your natural, automatic way of responding to situations in the future. So much love to everyone. Thank you so much for being with me today. Really always a pleasure to be here. Much love, many blessings, everybody. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Bye.